Your mind is lying to you right now, and that's completely normal. The scariest psychological effect that's totally normal. You think you know your own mind, don't you? You believe that the thoughts running through your head belong to you, that the reality you're experiencing is the same one everyone else sees, that your sense of self is solid and unchanging. But what if I told you that right now, as you're reading these words, your brain is lying to you in ways so fundamental that questioning them feels like questioning gravity itself? What if the scariest thing about your psychology isn't some rare disorder or extreme condition, but rather the completely normal, everyday functions that everyone experiences but nobody talks about? This isn't about mental illness or pathology. This is about the disturbing truth that even the healthiest, most well-adjusted minds operate in ways that, when you really look at them, seem absolutely terrifying. We've been taught to believe that our thoughts are trustworthy, that our perceptions are accurate, that the boundaries between self and reality are clear and stable. But psychology reveals something far more unsettling. Your mind is constantly generating experiences that have nothing to do with external reality, simulating threats that don't exist, creating temporal distortions, and even making you question whether you exist at all. And the most disturbing part, all of this is completely normal. This is how human behavior works for everyone, not just you. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to acknowledge. The line between normal psychological experiences and what we'd consider disturbing or pathological is far thinner than we pretend. You've had intrusive thoughts that made you question your sanity. You've experienced moments where reality felt unreal or time felt wrong. You've caught yourself on autopilot, losing chunks of your life to dissociation. You've felt anxiety flood in during moments of complete safety. These aren't signs that something's broken. They're features of human consciousness, not bugs. But we live in a culture that demands we pretend everything's fine, that our minds operate smoothly and logically, that anyone who admits to these experiences must be damaged or weak. This conspiracy of silence means most people go through life thinking they're alone in their weird psychology, never realizing that everyone around them is having equally strange experiences behind their composed exteriors. Strange and unusual psychological phenomena are the norm, not the exception, yet we've collectively agreed not to talk about them because acknowledging how weird our minds really are feels too destabilizing. We'd rather maintain the comfortable fiction that consciousness is straightforward and that our subjective experience accurately reflects objective reality. But that fiction comes at a cost. When you inevitably experience these normal but disturbing psychological effects, you interpret them as personal failures rather than universal human experiences. What you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you understand your own mind. This isn't self-help fluff or pop psychology. This is the raw, unsettling truth about how human behavior actually works, backed by psychological research, but rarely communicated in ways that make you truly understand the implications. You're going to learn about the intrusive thought paradox that makes unwanted thoughts stronger the more you fight them. You'll discover why becoming hyper-aware of your own existence can trigger existential derealization that makes reality feel alien. You'll understand how your brain simulates threats so convincingly that you experience authentic fear from dangers that exist only in your imagination. You'll explore the disturbing moment when you realize your thoughts aren't actually you, which either liberates or terrifies depending on how you process it. You'll dive into temporal slippage, where time itself stops making sense and hours disappear while minutes stretch into eternities. You'll recognize the normality of mild dissociation that steals your presence from daily life, and you'll confront the paradox of safety-triggered fear that makes peace feel more dangerous than chaos. Each of these phenomena sounds like it should be rare, like it should indicate some kind of psychological problem, but they're not rare. They're universal. They're happening to you right now, and they're happening to everyone around you. The question isn't whether you experience these things. The question is whether you're aware enough to recognize them when they occur. Here's why understanding these psychological effects matters more than you might think. When you don't know these experiences are normal, you add a layer of suffering on top of the experience itself. You have an intrusive thought and then panic about what it means that you had the thought. You experience dissociation and worry that you're losing your grip on reality. You feel anxious during safe moments and conclude something must be fundamentally wrong with you. This secondary suffering, the fear about the fear, the anxiety about the anxiety, reality often causes more distress than the original psychological phenomenon. But when you understand that these weird psychology mechanisms are built into human consciousness, when you recognize them as normal operations rather than malfunctions, everything changes. You gain the ability to observe these experiences without drowning in them. You develop what psychology calls metacognitive awareness, the capacity to step back and recognize that what's happening in your mind isn't necessarily true or important just because it's happening. This doesn't make the experiences disappear, but it removes their power to convince you that you're broken or going crazy. What you're about to learn isn't comfortable, and it won't give you easy answers or quick fixes, but it will give you something more valuable, the truth about how your mind actually works, and the recognition that you're not alone in experiencing psychological phenomena that feel isolating and strange. So let's dive into the scariest psychological effects that are totally normal, because understanding them is the first step to living with them skillfully rather than being terrorized by them. The intrusive thought paradox. You're standing at the edge of a tall building looking down at the city below, and suddenly, out of nowhere, your mind whispers something terrifying. What if I jumped? It's not that you want to. You're not suicidal. You're perfectly happy. But there it is, that bizarre thought, uninvited and deeply unsettling. This is what psychology calls an intrusive thought. And here's the strange part. The more you try to push it away, the louder it becomes. It's like telling yourself not to think about a pink elephant. Suddenly, that's all you can see. This paradox reveals something profound about human behavior that most people never consciously recognize. Your brain, in its attempt to protect you, sometimes creates the very fear you're trying to avoid. These thoughts aren't signs of madness or hidden desires. They're actually markers of a mind that's working exactly as it should, constantly scanning for danger, even when there isn't any. The uncomfortable truth is that everyone experiences these weird psychology phenomena, yet we rarely talk about them because they feel too shameful to share. What makes intrusive thoughts so disturbing isn't their content, it's the fact that they appear without permission. Imagine you're holding your newborn baby, overwhelmed with love, and then a flash crosses your mind. What if I dropped them? Your heart races. You feel sick. You wonder what kind of monster you are. But here's what's actually happening. Your brain is running simulations. It's testing scenarios, rehearsing dangers, making sure you're hyper-aware of every possible threat. This is a feature, not a bug. Think of it like your mind's own security system that sometimes goes off when there's no burglar. It's overly cautious because the stakes feel so high. Strange and unusual psychological phenomena like these are your brain's way of saying, hey, this thing matters to you, so I'm going to make absolutely sure nothing bad happens. The problem is, this protective mechanism doesn't come with an off switch. Once you notice the thought, you can't unnotice it. And the more you tell yourself, I shouldn't think this, the more attention you're giving it, feeding the very loop you're trying to escape. Now let's get practical about this, because understanding isn't enough. You need tools. When an intrusive thought strikes, the worst thing you can do is fight it. It's like quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. Instead, acknowledge it without judgment. Say to yourself, there's that weird thought again. Interesting. Don't analyze why it appeared or what it might mean about your character. That's the trap. Psychology research shows that people who simply observe intrusive thoughts without engaging them experience far less distress than those who try to suppress or reason with them. For example, if you're driving and think, I could swerve into oncoming traffic, instead of spiraling into panic or questioning your sanity, just notice it. That's my brain doing its protection thing. Then gently redirect your attention to something concrete. The song playing on the radio, the feeling of the steering wheel, the colors of the cars around you. This isn't about positive thinking or affirmations. It's about not taking the bait. You're essentially training your brain to understand that these thoughts don't need emergency responses, which gradually reduces their frequency and intensity. The intrusive thought paradox teaches us something even more unsettling. The line between normal and disturbed is far thinner than we'd like to believe. Research in human behavior reveals that the content of intrusive thoughts in people diagnosed with OCD is virtually identical to those in the general population. The difference isn't what they think, it's how they react to what they think. Someone without OCD might have a bizarre thought and forget it within seconds. Someone with OCD might have the same thought and spend hours analyzing it, which creates more thoughts, which leads to more analysis, creating a vicious cycle. This tells us something profound about the human mind. We're all operating with the same basic software, but some of us get caught in loops that others don't. These weird psychology mechanisms mechanisms aren't signs that something's broken. They're signs that something's incredibly complex. Your mind generates thousands of thoughts per day, and not all of them make sense or align with your values. That's okay. That's normal. But when you start believing that having a thought means something deep and dark about who you are, that's when the real trouble begins. And here's the kicker. The very act of worrying about your thoughts proves you're not the person you fear you might be, because actual dangerous people don't worry about being dangerous. Hyper-awareness of existence. Existential derealization. Have you ever been in the middle of a completely ordinary moment, brushing your teeth, sitting at your desk, standing in line at the grocery store, when suddenly you become acutely aware that you exist? Not just that you're there, but that you are. Your hand isn't just moving. You're controlling meat and bone wrapped in skin. Your thoughts aren't just happening. There's a consciousness inside your skull experiencing them. It's like waking up inside your own life and realizing, for the first time in a while, that you're a living, breathing organism navigating a physical reality. This phenomenon, which psychology identifies as existential derealization, is one of the most unnerving yet completely normal experiences of human behavior. It's that moment when the autopilot shuts off and you're forced to confront the raw fact of your existence. Most people go through life on cruise control, never questioning the baseline reality of being alive. But then, out of nowhere, the veil lifts and everything feels simultaneously more real and less real than it did a second ago. This weird psychology occurrence isn't a malfunction. It's actually your brain briefly stepping outside its own programming to observe itself. The unsettling part about hyper-awareness of existence is how it makes the familiar feel alien. You look at your hands and think, these are my hands. I'm controlling these. You hear your voice and wonder, is that really what I sound like? You become conscious of your breathing and suddenly you can't remember how to breathe automatically anymore. It's as if someone turned up the volume on every sensory input and every metacognitive process at once. Strange and unusual psychological phenomena like this reveal just how much of our daily experience runs on automation. We don't normally think about thinking. We don't usually notice that we're noticing. But when we do, it can feel like reality itself has shifted. Some people describe it as feeling like they're watching their life from behind their own eyes, like a passenger in their own body. This isn't psychosis or a break from reality. It's actually hyper-reality, an overwhelming awareness of the present moment that our brains aren't equipped to sustain for long periods. Psychology research suggests this happens when the brain's default mode network, which usually keeps us in a comfortable narrative about ourselves, temporarily disengages. Let's break down what's actually happening during these moments, because understanding the mechanism makes it less frightening. Your brain has two main operating modes, the narrative self and the experiencing self. The narrative self is the one that tells the story of your life, who you are, what you're doing, where you're going. It's the voice that says, I'm John, I work in marketing, I'm tired today. The experiencing self is the raw perception of sensory information without the story. During existential derealization, there's a sudden shift from narrative to experiencing, and it feels profoundly disorienting because you lose the comfortable fiction that usually mediates your relationship with reality. For example, imagine you're having a conversation with a friend, and mid-sentence, you suddenly become aware of the absurdity of it all. You're making sounds with your mouth that represent concepts, and another consciousness is receiving those sounds and constructing meaning from them. This moment of clarity is actually a glimpse into the true nature of human behavior and communication, stripped of its social conditioning. It's not that something's wrong, it's that you're seeing what's always been true but usually invisible. The discomfort comes from the fact that this level of awareness isn't sustainable or practical for daily functioning. So what do you do when you find yourself caught in this hyper-aware state, feeling like a stranger in your own existence? First, recognize that this is temporary. These episodes rarely last more than a few minutes to a few hours, and they pass on their own. Trying to force yourself back to normal only intensifies the feeling. Instead, ground yourself in something physical and routine. Touch different textures, the smooth surface of a table, the rough fabric of your jeans, the coolness of a glass of water. Engage your senses deliberately. If you're at home, make yourself a cup of tea and focus on each step. Boiling the water, choosing the tea bag, feeling the warmth of the cup. These simple, repetitive actions help reactivate your narrative mode. Some people find that talking to someone about mundane topics, the weather, weekend plans, a TV show, helps restore the sense of normalcy. The key is not to fight the awareness, but to gently gently redirect your attention toward concrete, immediate tasks. This isn't about escaping reality. It's about returning to the functional level of consciousness that allows you to navigate daily life. And here's something fascinating. These moments of existential clarity, while uncomfortable, can actually be portals to deeper understanding. Many philosophers, artists, and thinkers throughout history have intentionally cultivated this state, what some call mindfulness or presence, as a way to access insights about the nature of consciousness. The difference is in the intention and the interpretation. When it happens involuntarily and you interpret it as something wrong, it becomes distressing. But these strange glimpses into the nature of existence also hint at something even more unsettling about how your mind constructs your sense of self. The mind's capacity to simulate threat without danger. Picture this. You're lying in bed at night, completely safe in your locked home, when suddenly your heart starts racing, your palms get sweaty, your breathing becomes shallow. There's no intruder, no fire, no emergency, yet your body is responding as if there is. What's happening? Your mind is running threat simulations, playing out worst-case scenarios that haven't happened and probably never will. This is one of the most fascinating aspects of human behavior. Our brains are prediction machines that don't always distinguish between imagined danger and real danger. Psychology has shown that the same neural pathways activate whether you're facing an actual threat or just thinking about one. Your amygdala, the brain's fear center, doesn't care if the tiger is real or hypothetical. It triggers the same alarm system either way. This weird psychology mechanism was incredibly useful when humans faced constant physical threats. Imagining danger helped our ancestors prepare for it, improving survival odds. But in modern life, where most threats are abstract and future-oriented, financial worries, social rejection, health concerns, this system misfires constantly, creating stress responses to dangers that exist only in our minds. The truly unsettling part is how convincing these simulations feel. Your brain doesn't just think about potential threats, it experiences them as if they're happening right now. Let's say you have an important presentation next week. Starting days in advance, your mind begins rehearsing everything that could go wrong. You'll forget your words, people will laugh, your career will be ruined. Each time you run this mental simulation, your body releases stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, as if the humiliation is actually occurring. This is why anxiety is so exhausting. You're essentially living through traumatic events that haven't happened yet and might never happen. Strange and unusual psychological phenomena like this reveal a critical truth. Your emotional system can't tell the difference between memory, imagination, and reality. They all feel equally real in the moment. This is why horror movies work. You know the monster isn't real, yet your heart pounds anyway. It's why reading about someone's embarrassing moment can make you cringe as if it happened to you. Your brain's simulation capacity is so powerful that it can generate authentic emotional and physical responses to completely fictional scenarios. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Better to prepare for a threat that doesn't materialize than to be caught off guard by one that does. Now here's where it gets practical, because recognizing these simulations is the first step to managing them. When you catch yourself catastrophizing, imagining the absolute worst outcome of a situation, pause and ask yourself, is this happening right now, or am I simulating it? Most of the time, you'll realize it's a simulation. Your mind is playing a movie, and you've been watching it as if it's a documentary when it's actually speculative fiction. One effective technique is called reality testing. When anxiety strikes, ground yourself in the present moment by identifying 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. This sensory inventory pulls you out of the simulation and back into actual reality. For example, if you're worried about a medical test result, your mind might simulate scenarios of terminal illness, funeral arrangements, and leaving your loved ones behind. But right now, in this actual moment, you're sitting in a chair, breathing normally, physically safe. The threat exists only in the future and only as a possibility, not a certainty. Another powerful approach is to treat your anxious thoughts like weather reports. My brain is forecasting disaster, but forecasts are often wrong. This creates distance between you and the simulation, reminding you that thoughts are mental events, not facts. The challenge is that our modern world constantly feeds this simulation system. Social media shows us everyone's highlight reels, making us simulate scenarios where we're falling behind. News outlets broadcast catastrophes, training our brains to expect disaster. Our jobs demand we plan for contingencies, forcing us to imagine everything that could go wrong. We're essentially living in a state of perpetual threat simulation, and our nervous systems are paying the price. Psychology research indicates that chronic stress from imagined threats threats has the same health impacts as stress from real threats: weakened immune function, cardiovascular problems, digestive issues, and mental health challenges. Your body can't sustain emergency mode indefinitely. This is why practices like meditation, mindfulness, and cognitive behavioral therapy are so effective. They interrupt the simulation loop. They teach your brain to recognize when it's creating fictional scenarios and to return attention to what's actually happening. Here's a counterintuitive insight. The goal isn't to stop your brain from simulating threats altogether. That's impossible and probably unwise. The goal is to recognize simulations for what they are: useful survival mechanisms that often overshoot their purpose. When you can observe your mind running these scenarios without getting swept up in them, you maintain the benefit of preparedness without the cost of chronic anxiety. And this capacity to observe without reacting connects directly to an even stranger realization about the nature of consciousness itself. The moment you realize your thoughts aren't you, there comes a moment, sometimes sudden, sometimes gradual, when you catch yourself thinking and realize, wait, if I'm observing my thoughts, then who's doing the observing? It's like discovering there's a witness inside your mind, watching the stream of consciousness flow by. This realization is simultaneously liberating and terrifying because it challenges the most fundamental assumption about human behavior, that you are your thoughts. But if you can watch your thoughts, if you can notice them coming and going, then logically you must be something separate from them. Psychology calls this metacognition, the ability to think about thinking, and it's one of the most profound capabilities of the human mind. Most people spend their entire lives identified with every thought that passes through their awareness, never questioning whether those thoughts actually represent who they are. But once you see the gap between the thinker and the thoughts, everything changes. It's like realizing you've been watching a movie your whole life and suddenly noticing you're not the characters on screen, you're the audience. This weird psychology revelation can be destabilizing because it pulls the rug out from under your sense of identity. Let's explore what this actually means in practical terms, because this isn't just philosophical abstraction. Think about a moment when you were angry, really angry, and you said or did something you later regretted. In that moment, you were completely identified with the anger. You were angry, but later when you calmed down, you probably thought, that wasn't really me. I don't know what came over me. This is the beginning of recognizing that thoughts and emotions are events happening within your consciousness, not your consciousness itself. Consider your internal dialogue. There's constantly a voice narrating your experience, commenting on what's happening, planning, worrying, judging. But who's listening to that voice? If thoughts were truly you, there would be no distance between thinking and awareness. Yet you can observe a thought like, I'm not good enough, and recognize it as just a thought, not an absolute truth. Strange and unusual psychological phenomena occur when people first grasp this concept. They might feel unmoored, questioning what self even means. Some describe it as feeling like they're piloting a meat robot, conscious but separate from the biological machinery. Others experience profound relief, realizing they don't have to believe every thought their mind produces. Here's where this gets practical and life-changing. When you understand that thoughts aren't you, you gain the power to choose which ones to engage with. Imagine your mind as a busy highway and thoughts as cars passing by. Most people stand in the middle of the highway, getting hit by every vehicle. But when you realize you're not the traffic, you're the person watching from the sidewalk, you can let most cars pass without jumping in front of them. For example, if the thought, I'm a failure, appears, instead of spiraling into depression because you've identified with that thought, you can observe it. There's the, I'm a failure thought again. Interesting that my mind produces that. This creates space. You're not suppressing the thought or pretending it doesn't exist. You're simply not granting it ultimate authority over your sense of self. This practice, rooted in both ancient meditation traditions and modern psychology, is called cognitive diffusion. Try this exercise. For one day, prefix every thought with, I'm having the thought that, instead of I'm anxious, say, I'm having the thought that I'm anxious. Instead of this is boring, say, I'm having the thought that this is boring. Notice how this tiny shift creates distance between you and your mental content. It reminds you that thoughts are produced by your mind, but they aren't your mind itself. The implications of this realization extend far beyond managing negative thoughts. It fundamentally changes your relationship with your entire internal experience. When you stop being your thoughts, you also stop being your emotions, your memories, your mental images. All of these become phenomena you're aware of rather than things you are. This is what meditation teachers mean when they talk about witnessing consciousness, or what psychologists refer to when discussing the observing self. It's the part of you that remains constant while everything else changes. Your thoughts change, your emotions change, your beliefs and opinions change, even your memories shift over time, but the awareness that observes all of this remains. This is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of human behavior. We spend so much energy defending and building an identity based on thoughts, beliefs, and narratives that are fundamentally impermanent and unreliable. We say, I am an anxious person, or I am a creative person, identifying with passing mental patterns as if they're permanent features. But are you the same person you were 10 years ago? Your cells have replaced themselves multiple times. Your beliefs have evolved. Your memories have been reconstructed. The only constant is the awareness witnessing it all. This weird psychology insight that the observer is more fundamentally you than anything being observed might be the closest we come to understanding what consciousness actually is. And once you grasp this, even the way you experience time itself begins to feel strange. Temporal slippage, when time feels wrong. You've experienced it before, even if you've never had a name for it. Time suddenly feels wrong, not just slow or fast, but fundamentally distorted, as if the fabric of temporal reality has stretched or compressed in ways that shouldn't be possible. You look at the clock, and it says 3 counts p.m., but it feels like it should be 7 sounds p.m. or maybe 11 sounds to a.m. Your internal sense of time's passage has completely disconnected from objective reality. This phenomenon, which psychology refers to as temporal slippage or time distortion, is far more common than most people realize. It's that disorienting sensation when an hour feels like 10 minutes or 10 minutes feel like an hour, and you can't reconcile your subjective experience with what the clock tells you. Human behavior is deeply tied to our perception of time, and when that perception malfunctions, it creates a profound sense of unreality. Sometimes entire days seem to vanish, leaving you wondering where the time went. Other times, a single moment stretches endlessly, making you feel trapped in temporal amber. This weird psychology occurrence isn't limited to altered states or extreme situations. It happens to ordinary people during ordinary activities, revealing just how fragile and constructed our sense of time really is. What makes temporal slippage so unsettling is that time is supposed to be the one constant, the reliable framework within which everything else happens. We trust that seconds tick by at a consistent rate, that 5 minutes is always 5 minutes. But your brain doesn't experience time objectively. It constructs your temporal experience based on attention, emotion, and memory formation. When you're engaged in something stimulating, a fascinating conversation, an intense video game, a creative project, time seems to accelerate because your brain is processing information efficiently, not marking many distinct memories. Conversely, when you're bored or anxious, time crawls because your brain is hyper-aware, creating more memory markers and making each moment feel longer. Strange and unusual psychological phenomena emerge when these mechanisms misfire or operate in unexpected ways. For example, during high-stress situations like car accidents, people often report that time slowed down, allowing them to perceive details they normally wouldn't notice. This isn't actually time slowing. It's your brain dramatically increasing its processing speed and memory encoding, creating the illusion of temporal expansion when you recall the event. Psychology research shows that our brains are constantly editing our experience of time based on context, but we rarely notice this editing process unless something goes wrong. Let's get practical about understanding and working with temporal slippage, because once you recognize what's happening, it becomes less frightening. First, understand that your perception of time is heavily influenced by novelty and routine. When you do the same things every day, same commute, same lunch, same evening routine, your brain stops creating detailed memories because there's nothing new to encode. This is why weeks, months, or even years can seem to blur together as you get older. You're not actually experiencing time differently, you're just not creating memorable markers. To combat this, intentionally introduce novelty into your routine. Take a different route to work. Try a new restaurant. Rearrange your furniture. Read books from genres you've never explored. If you typically read fiction, Pick up something like Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari or Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. These disruptions force your brain to pay attention and encode new memories, which makes time feel more substantial and less like it's slipping through your fingers. Another technique is time anchoring. Throughout your day, pause and consciously note what time it is and what you're doing. This creates temporal landmarks that help your brain track time's passage more accurately. The deeper question is why temporal slippage happens at all, and the answer reveals something profound about consciousness and human behavior. Your brain doesn't have a dedicated time organ, like you have eyes for sight or ears for sound. Instead, time perception emerges from the interaction of multiple brain systems, attention networks, memory formation, emotional processing, and circadian rhythms. When these systems are out of sync due to stress, fatigue, illness, or intense emotional states, your temporal experience can become distorted. This is why grief makes time feel strange, why depression makes days blend together, why anxiety makes hours feel endless. Your emotional state literally changes how your brain constructs temporal reality. Psychology has found that people with certain conditions like ADHD or autism often experience time differently than neurotypical individuals, not because they're broken, but because their brains process information differently. This weird psychology insight suggests that there might not be one correct way to experience time. We all exist in slightly different temporal realities based on our neural architecture and current state. And here's what makes this truly unsettling. If time perception is this malleable, this dependent on brain state and attention, what does that say about the nature of reality itself? The moments you think you're experiencing now are actually reconstructions happening milliseconds after the fact, edited and filtered by your brain before reaching consciousness. The present moment you're living in is already the past by the time you're aware of it, yet somehow your mind tricks you into feeling like you're experiencing reality in real time. This recognition that even your most immediate experience is constructed and delayed brings us to something even more disturbing about how routinely your mind deceives you. The normality of mild dissociation. You're driving home from work, and suddenly you realize you don't remember the last 10 minutes of the journey. You've navigated turns, stopped at red lights, merged into traffic, all while your conscious mind was somewhere else entirely. This is mild dissociation, and it's one of the most common yet rarely discussed aspects of human behavior. Most people hear the word dissociation and think of severe psychological conditions, dramatic breaks from reality portrayed in movies. But the truth is, dissociation exists on a spectrum, and the mild end of that spectrum is something virtually everyone experiences multiple times per day. It's that feeling of being on autopilot, of watching yourself go through motions without being fully present. Psychology recognizes this as a normal protective mechanism that allows your brain to conserve energy by letting routine activities run in the background while your conscious attention focuses elsewhere. You're not spacing out because something's wrong with you. You're spacing out because your brain is incredibly efficient at automating familiar tasks. This weird psychology mechanism is so seamlessly integrated into daily life that most people never question it, never stop to wonder how unsettling it actually is that we can lose chunks of time to mental autopilot. The strange part about mild dissociation is how it reveals the constructed nature of consciousness itself. When you're driving on autopilot and suddenly snap back to awareness, where were you during those missing minutes? Your eyes were processing visual information, your hands were moving the steering wheel, your foot was working the pedals, but you weren't consciously there. So who was driving? This points to something profound. Consciousness isn't a constant stream, but rather a spotlight that moves around, illuminating different parts of your experience while leaving other parts in shadow. Strange and unusual psychological phenomena like highway hypnosis demonstrate that massive amounts of complex information processing can happen without conscious awareness. Your brain can navigate traffic, make split-second decisions, and coordinate intricate motor functions, while your conscious mind is replaying a conversation from earlier or planning what to make for dinner. This isn't multitasking in the traditional sense, it's your brain running different programs simultaneously, with conscious awareness allocated to only one program at a time. The unsettling implication is that you, the conscious, aware self that feels like it's in control, might be more of a passenger than a driver, only becoming aware of decisions and actions after they've already been initiated by unconscious processes. Let's make this practical, because understanding mild dissociation helps you recognize when it's serving you and when it's stealing your life. Dissociation is useful for routine tasks that don't require conscious attention. You don't need to consciously think about every step when you brush your teeth or make coffee in the morning. Your brain automates these sequences, freeing up mental resources for more important processing. However, problems arise when dissociation becomes your default mode, causing you to lose entire days, weeks, or even years to autopilot. This is particularly common in modern life, where routines are so established that people can go through entire workdays without being truly present. To combat unhealthy dissociation, practice what psychology calls grounding techniques. When you notice you've been on autopilot, deliberately engage your senses. Feel the texture of objects around you. Notice the temperature of the air. Listen to the ambient sounds. If you're eating, actually taste your food instead of mindlessly consuming it while scrolling through your phone. Try this exercise. Set random alarms on your phone throughout the day, and when they go off, pause and ask yourself, am I present right now or am I on autopilot? This simple check-in can dramatically increase your conscious presence. For deeper practice, consider activities that demand full attention and resist automation. Things like learning a musical instrument, practicing a new language, or engaging in complex problem-solving. Apps like Duolingo for language learning or chess platforms like chess.com force your brain to stay engaged because they require active processing that can't be automated. Here's what makes mild dissociation particularly fascinating from a psychology perspective. It's the bridge between normal functioning and more severe dissociative experiences. The same mechanism that lets you drive home on autopilot can, under extreme stress or trauma, expand to protect you from overwhelming experiences by creating distance between your conscious self and what's happening. This is why people sometimes describe traumatic events as feeling unreal or like they were watching from outside their body. It's the brain's emergency protocol, amplifying the same dissociative process that handles mundane tasks. Understanding this helps normalize a range of experiences that might otherwise seem alarming. If you've ever felt slightly detached from reality during a stressful period, that's not a sign of psychological breakdown. It's your brain using a normal protective mechanism in response to abnormal circumstances. The key is recognizing when dissociation is adaptive, letting you function efficiently, versus when it's maladaptive, causing you to miss your life. Human behavior studies show that people who are chronically stressed or understimulated tend to dissociate more frequently, essentially checking out from an existence that feels overwhelming or meaningless. This is why creating engaging, varied experiences is so important, not just for happiness but for maintaining present moment awareness. The goal isn't to eliminate dissociation entirely. That would be exhausting and inefficient. The goal is to have conscious choice over when you're present and when you're on autopilot. And sometimes, being fully present means confronting something that initially feels deeply threatening, even when you're perfectly safe. The fear triggered by complete safety. Here's one of the most paradoxical aspects of human behavior: the moment you achieve complete safety, your mind often floods with anxiety. You finally get that promotion you've been working toward, and instead of relief, you feel dread. You're lying in bed in a secure home with no actual threats present, and suddenly panic washes over you. You've reached a period of stability in your life, good health, solid relationships, financial security, and your brain responds by inventing problems to worry about. This phenomenon, which psychology recognizes but rarely discusses openly, reveals something deeply strange about how our minds are wired. We're not designed for safety, we're designed for survival. Our ancestors lived in environments where constant vigilance meant staying alive, where letting your guard down could be fatal. That ancient programming doesn't just disappear because you live in a world with locked doors, stable food supplies, and modern medicine. Instead, when your environment becomes too safe, too predictable, your threat detection system starts misfiring, creating anxiety out of nowhere because being calm feels dangerous. This weird psychology mechanism is your brain essentially saying, "This can't be right. Something must be wrong. I should be worried about something." It's like a security guard who's been trained to expect intruders suddenly working at a building where nobody ever breaks in. The lack of actual threats makes them suspicious of everything. The truly unsettling part is how safety itself becomes the trigger. When external threats disappear, your mind turns inward, finding dangers in your own thoughts, bodily sensations, and future possibilities. This is why people with seemingly perfect lives sometimes experience the worst anxiety. They have nothing concrete to worry about, so their brains start catastrophizing about abstract possibilities. What if I get sick? What if the economy crashes? What if my partner leaves me? Strange and unusual psychological phenomena emerge when you realize that your own peace and security can activate the same fear response as actual danger. Psychology research shows that sudden life improvements, getting married, having a baby, landing a dream job, often coincide with increased anxiety and depression, not because these these events are inherently stressful, but because they create a cognitive dissonance between "I should feel happy" and "I feel terrified." Your nervous system, calibrated for threat detection, doesn't know what to do with sustained periods of safety. It's like being a soldier returning from combat to civilian life. The absence of danger doesn't bring relief. It brings hypervigilance and the constant expectation that something bad is about to happen. This is why many successful people self-sabotage. Unconsciously, chaos feels more familiar and manageable than peace. Let's make this practical, because recognizing this pattern is essential to breaking it. When you notice anxiety arising during safe, calm moments, resist the urge to search for something to justify the feeling. That's the trap. Your mind will find something to worry about if you give it permission to search. Instead, name what's happening. This is safety-triggered anxiety. My nervous system is uncomfortable with peace. This simple act of labeling the experience creates distance and reduces its power. One effective technique is called safe place anchoring. Deliberately practice being present. During safe, pleasant moments, when you're sitting comfortably with a cup of coffee or taking a warm shower or petting a cat, pause and consciously notice, "I am safe right now. Nothing bad is happening." Your brain needs repeated evidence that safety doesn't lead to disaster. Over time, this retrains your threat detection system to tolerate peace without triggering alarms. Another approach is structured worry time. Set aside 15 minutes per day where you're allowed to worry about anything. Write down your concerns, explore them fully. But outside that designated time, when anxiety arises, remind yourself, "Not now. I'll worry about this during worry time." This contains the anxiety instead of letting it bleed into every moment of your day. For physical symptoms of safety-triggered anxiety, engage in activities that release the stored tension. Exercise, dancing, even shaking your body vigorously for a few minutes. Your nervous system holds the expectation of threat physically, and movement helps discharge that energy. Here's the deeper truth that psychology is only beginning to fully understand. Humans need a certain amount of challenge and uncertainty to feel psychologically healthy. Complete safety, while seeming ideal, can actually be destabilizing because it removes the sense of purpose and agency that comes from overcoming obstacles. This is why wealthy people often feel empty, despite having every material need met. This is why retirement for many leads to decline rather than fulfillment. This is why people create artificial challenges, extreme sports, competitive hobbies, even unnecessary drama when their lives become too comfortable. Your brain evolved to solve problems, navigate threats, and adapt to changing circumstances. When you remove all challenges, you're essentially telling a sophisticated problem-solving machine that its services are no longer needed and it doesn't respond well to unemployment. The goal isn't to create unnecessary danger or reject safety. That would be foolish. The goal is to channel your mind's need for challenge into constructive pursuits. Choose difficult projects that stretch your capabilities. Learn skills that require effort and persistence. Engage in activities where the outcome is uncertain and your agency matters. This gives your threat detection system something productive to focus on instead of inventing catastrophes. Human behavior studies consistently show that people report the highest life satisfaction not during periods of complete ease, but during periods of meaningful challenge, when they're working towards something difficult but achievable. This weird psychology insight reveals that we're not actually seeking happiness in the sense of constant contentment. We're seeking engagement, purpose, and the satisfaction that comes from overcoming obstacles. And the scariest part of all this? Everything you've just learned. All these unsettling truths about intrusive thoughts, existential awareness, threat simulations, the illusion of self, temporal distortion, dissociation, and safety-triggered fear represents just the surface of how strange your mind truly is. So, what kind of ending can we have here? So where does all of this leave you? You've just learned that your mind operates in ways that are simultaneously fascinating and deeply unsettling. You've discovered that intrusive thoughts, existential derealization, threat simulations, the illusion of a fixed self, temporal distortions, dissociation, and safety-triggered anxiety aren't signs of psychological breakdown. They're features of normal human consciousness. But here's the critical question. What are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to go back to pretending your mind is simple and straightforward, or are you going to start paying attention to these phenomena as they arise in your daily life? life. Because understanding weird psychology intellectually is one thing, actually recognizing it in real time and responding skillfully is something else entirely. The difference between someone who's controlled by these psychological effects and someone who navigates them with awareness is simple: practice. You need to catch yourself in the act. Notice when an intrusive thought appears. Observe when you're running threat simulations. Recognize when you've dissociated from the present moment. Each time you catch yourself, you're strengthening that metacognitive muscle, that ability to witness your mind without being swept away by it. Let me ask you something directly. How many hours of your life have you lost to anxiety about things that never happened? How many moments have you missed because you were on autopilot? How many times have you been terrorized by your own thoughts, believing they meant something dark about who you are? And here's the harder question. Are you going to let that continue? You now have information that most people never get access to, not because it's secret, but because we collectively avoid discussing how strange and unusual psychological phenomena actually are. You know that your mind generates noise that doesn't mean anything. You know that thoughts aren't facts and simulations aren't reality. You know that the observer in you is separate from what's being observed. So what are you going to do differently, starting today? Are you going to practice grounding techniques when anxiety strikes? Are you going to introduce novelty into your routines to combat temporal slippage? Are you going to observe intrusive thoughts without judgment instead of fighting them? These aren't rhetorical questions. I'm genuinely asking you to decide right now how you're going to apply this understanding, because knowledge without application is just entertainment. And you didn't watch this video to be entertained. You watched it because something in you recognizes that your relationship with your own mind needs to change. Here's what I want you to consider. Every single person you encounter today is experiencing their own version of these psychological phenomena. Your coworker, who seems perfectly composed, is fighting intrusive thoughts. Your friend who appears confident is dealing with existential uncertainty. Your family member who seems stable is navigating temporal distortions and dissociative episodes. We're all walking around with these weird, unsettling experiences happening inside our heads, pretending everything's normal on the outside. But what if you became the person who acknowledges this truth? What if, instead of adding to the collective pretense, you brought awareness and compassion to your own psychological experiences and, by extension, to others? Human behavior is messy, strange, and often frightening, but it's also universal. The anxiety you feel isn't unique to you. The thoughts that disturb you aren't signs that you're broken. You're experiencing what billions of other humans are experiencing right now. You're just more aware of it. And that awareness, uncomfortable as it is actually your greatest asset. Because you can't change what you don't see, and you can't navigate what you don't understand. So I'm challenging you. For the next week, practice noticing these phenomena without reacting to them. Keep a mental or written log of when you catch yourself simulating threats, dissociating, or believing thoughts that aren't serving you. See if you can observe these experiences with curiosity instead of fear. But don't stop here. If this video opened your eyes to how complex and strange psychology really is, then you need to keep learning. This is just the beginning. There are layers upon layers of psychological phenomena we didn't even touch. The ways trauma rewires perception, how social conditioning shapes your sense of self, why certain emotional patterns repeat across your lifetime, what consciousness actually is beyond the brain. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because we're going deep into human behavior, into the uncomfortable truths about how minds work that most content creators won't discuss. We're exploring weird psychology, strange and unusual psychological phenomena, the mechanisms that drive human behavior from the shadows of your unconscious. This isn't content designed to make you feel good. It's content designed to make you understand yourself at a level most people never reach. And here's the thing, you can't unsee what you've just learned. Your awareness has shifted. The next time an intrusive thought appears, you'll recognize it. The next time you feel anxious in a safe environment, you'll know what's happening. The next time you dissociate, you'll catch yourself sooner. That's growth. That's evolution. That's what happens when you stop running from the uncomfortable truths about your own mind and start facing them directly. So hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications, and let's continue this journey into the depths of human consciousness. Because if you found this valuable, you need to see what we're covering next. Your mind is stranger than you ever imagined, and understanding it is the most important work you'll ever do.